Welcome to Between Product and Partnerships, a podcast focused on bringing together product, partnership, and engineering leaders to discuss how to build, support, and scale SaaS ecosystems. This podcast is presented by Pandium, an integration platform for building native integrations.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to our podcast, Between Product and Partnerships, where we talk about the challenges and what it takes to build integrations, partnerships, and SaaS platforms. And today I am so excited to have Arvita Tripati join our podcast. Arvita, can you share a little bit about your background and what you've been up to in your career? I'm really excited because I think your background's really interesting.
Thank you so much, Cristina. So let's see. So I started off almost 20 years ago in the world of medical devices, doing lip implants of all things in customer service. And over the years, I ended up, going into other areas of the business, working in quality and then regulatory, wearing hats in privacy and then security. And through all of that, I was like, wow, this is super interesting. There are a lot of people who aren't like taking, employee first sort of approaches to doing compliance. How do we flip that around? And so in my compliance capacity, then I was always thinking like a product manager. And after a while, I was like, well, why don't I just do this as the main part of my job? And so went back to school, got my MBA and ended up in product management. And so over the years, I've worked on a variety of devices, things like contact lenses or the AliveCore EKG. So one of the first wearables. It was the basis for, I think, the Apple Watch EKG, Clip Health. We were making COVID point of care diagnostics for detection of COVID. And then these days, I'm an advisor at an accelerator and working on imagining what the future of healthcare looks like at that intersection of innovation and compliance.
So interesting. And I know so little about this space. And I have to ask about these lip implants. Is this like, were they, including not cosmetic, was it like a, I don't know, reactive or?
Yeah. So, so it was actually cosmetic back in that point in time. It was, everybody wanted an Angelina Jolie sort of pout, but there was also the other half of the business that was maybe a little bit more altruistic, and it was the same product, but it could be repurposed for people with like cleft lips.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great epidemic of that in, areas outside of the US.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it was, part cosmetic and part reconstructive.
So interesting. And you said you started in customer support. That's like a good kind of way to segue into my first question, which is about how you got from, I guess, customer support into product management in a field that's so heavily regulated. Like what was the path there? And I ask, we do have folks that tune into this, that start, in CX at tech companies. And I actually love the path of like customer service or account management into like more product focused roles. I think it's a really unique insight that folks can bring when they've worked with the user so deeply. But I'm curious, how did you get here?
Sure. It was really just a lot of saying yes to things. So my bachelor's degree is in history. My MBA was in marketing. It was, kind of an accidental sort of career, but it was just a matter of like saying yes to things and like, okay, well, how does this work? How do I go upstream? How do I make things easier for my customers, whether they are, external customers and, clinicians that are seeking to use my product, or how do I make things easier for, say, employees trying to figure out, well, how do I place a purchase order? Because like I can just call up the vendor and buy something, but I know that compliance has all of these rules about how they want me to fill out the form in order to do that. And so, taking that sort of employee-centric, customer-centric sort of mindset and just building on that, saying yes to opportunities as they came up, that eventually got me recognized. And, I moved up the ladder. And I had a really wonderful opportunity with a former boss. He was CEO of the company. I was his director of quality, trust, and compliance. And he went to go start a new company, and it was all about compliance-centric innovation. And he asked me to be employee number one. And so with that, I was able to blend in that like product management with compliance and really go for it. So I think it's really just trying to build empathy and make sure that you're showing that, because every discipline, like I don't care if you're in HR, you're IT, you're compliance, every discipline has its customers, and you just need to like show that you're doing that empathy building, and eventually you can get recognized and have somebody kind of take a chance on you.
I agree. I think like saying yes and also feeling comfortable asking why has been something that's been really helpful in my career. And I think I've talked about it on another podcast, but that like vulnerability of just being like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Can you please explain that a different way? I literally just had a conversation with someone here internally, one of our engineers. So it's like, can you just like tell me what you guys did? I'm just curious. I think that'll
That is
take
so
you a long
important.
way.
Yeah, that is so important, being able to take the ego out of it and be able to like have that beginner's mindset.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And I know based on our pre-call that you have been working with AI for a really long time too, maybe like 10 plus years. And most of that I think is in healthcare. How has AI in healthcare evolved over time? Maybe like what were you doing 10 plus years ago and how do you see it today?
Before 10 years ago, I was working on products like radio frequency ablation generators or radiosurgery tools, and they had like algorithms that drove, say, application of energy to tissue to get a desired result. So it was like very like rules-based statistical models type of thing. Now you're getting things that are really more, I guess, evolving and taking inputs and able to transform them kind of on the fly. And so I think that there's acceptance for AI, like just kind of broadly in this application, but because they know that like there's other types of AI that have come before that have kind of paved the way for it,
Hmm.
but they're used to seeing a certain level of like transparency and information provided as far as like its actual safety and
Hmm.
explainability and accuracy. And so I think that that is where, AI, as we continue to implement generative approaches into the clinic, that's where we need to go, is like really focusing on that transparency and explainability. The science isn't what's like the problem. It's really like that storytelling portion of it that I think is really the area that companies will need to focus on in order to be able to get adoption. So with AliveCore, we have a wonderful founder like Dr. David Albert, Dr. Dave, and he is a cardiologist and a champion of it. And so he can lead the storytelling with great credibility
Hmm.
and be able to explain the science behind it with great conviction and credibility. And so I think that as we see additional applications of AI coming forward, we need to take a page out of his book and be able to like see, okay, what is the story we need to tell? Going back to that empathy
Hmm.
thought, like how do we empathize with like what the patient, what the clinician is like thinking about in the moment, and what story do we need to tell in order to be able to break through to them and really be able to have our message hit home.
Yeah, and I'm curious since you work in an environment that probably has a lot of like FDA compliance and things of that nature. Like when you think about the storytelling around AI, which is something that I think about a lot and like the trust element of it, do you think there's different requirements for, like your customer who might be the clinician and then the patient versus when you're trying to like articulate what you guys are doing to the FDA as an example? Like, do you guys have to change your story? Maybe any like anecdotes about how that I'm just thinking about like how people are receptive to those things in different roles. Like an end patient might be more receptive to, I know, an output of something, not understanding the complexity than a doctor. Maybe, I don't know. And I don't know about the FDA at all because I'm not involved in that. So just curious.
One of the things with working in this regulated area is you really need to put forth like you need to have things be evidence based, and so there are certain things that you need to prove to FDA in order to be able to in order to be able to go forward and have your product on the market, right? And so with that storytelling to them, there's just like a ton of data behind it, right? And of course, you wouldn't necessarily, you would maybe do like the executive summary of that, if at all, to provide that information, say to a patient. But I think that like the clinicians are really more interested in like what is that clinical outcome that you're driving, whereas like FDA is like what is the science behind, like how repeatable is that, and like what is the science behind that. So obviously the clinicians want to confirm or would like to think that that it is reliable and repeatable, but they are going to assume that, oh well, it's been through FDA, it's fine, right? Whereas FDA is really digging into the nuts and bolts of it to make sure that it's really there. So I think with that storytelling, then it's just like, how deep do you go and at what level? I think with all of these, whatever story you're telling to the patient or to the clinician, it all comes back to what can you actually prove? Some of these things need to be proven and reviewed by FDA. Others are just things that you can prove and have in your back pocket. And when FDA kind of comes to you, you can go ahead and have that discussion. Like there's this interesting thing with Whoop, I think kind of blew up over summer, where they have a product. It's, they're calling it Whoop Medical Grade for blood pressure. They're calling it a blood pressure insight. And everybody else on the market who's offering this type of information about blood pressure, they've been through the FDA process. They've gotten their clinical evidence. They have demonstrated their precision, their accuracy, all these things. Whoop has chosen to not do this. And they received a warning letter and publicly, pushing back on it and fighting day on it and talking about this as being a wellness thing. And like, if you're looking at it very surface, like, oh, okay, it's an insight. Well, so what does that actually mean? For me, when I think insight, I think, oh, it's some like analytical output. Like, oh, okay, my blood pressure is high and I need to maybe like have less salt in my diet, or maybe I need to be more adherent on my medication or something, right? Like that. And so it's really interesting to me, at least, that they're pushing back on this because they're actually showing the details of like your systolic and diastolic numbers to their patients. And, people could be taking action on this. And there's one camp that is thinking, oh, this is just like information and I'm not actually going to change anything. It's just good for me to know what my blood pressure is. But then there's another camp that is like, well, if people are like going to change their practices, whether it's like how they're taking medication or change their diets or whatnot, or even just like have stress and go to the doctor because they're like, my readings are high, that could be maybe a little bit of a challenge, and like maybe you should have that clinical validation evidence. So it's it's interesting seeing how two companies are approaching it. One with that like a LiveCore or Dexcom sort of approach where they're, yes, let's go ahead and get that evidence, and then the other with Whoop, like, oh, we're just wellness, even though we're doing regulated functions and we want to push policy change as part of our product launch. And so it's very, very interesting seeing this like unfold live.
Why would a company in a like reasonably well-established space like that, like maybe they're doing something really novel with blood pressure, but I feel like we as humans like know pretty well how to like measure blood pressure. Why would they not want to do the FDA approval? Like, is it just really expensive? Or I see it with like, I could see it with something that's a little more experimental. Maybe like there's not a well-worn path, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. I don't know anything about these guys specifically, obviously.
Yeah, it's not terribly expensive. I mean, I wouldn't want to pay for it out of pocket, but I want to say it was something like $3K last I looked. And so it's not it's not horrible. I think that it's just the time that it takes to gather that evidence, the breadth of the population that you need to do it on, right? Because, if you're using, say, an optical sensor, then, we've seen this with lasers. We've seen this with like for cosmetics or for blood oxygen sensors where, for people of darker skin tones, it's not quite as accurate or it can lead to burning and scarring and stuff. And so I don't know for sure, but I could imagine that the breadth of testing that would have needed to be done would maybe have taken quite a bit of time. Doing a clinical study is expensive. So, all of these things can like add up to, I don't know, a bit more delay. And if you don't have like a VC that is
Mm-hmm.
experienced in the world of medtech, and maybe they're pushing for you to like get that product launch in the next 6 months, as opposed to like understanding what the actual time frame is to do some of these things, I could see that, yeah, that being the cause of some of these challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like when folks operate in heavily regulated industries, there's like a certain level of tolerance that has to go into like this, just the time it takes to get through that stuff. Man, unrelated to this specific company, I bet you have so many insights about a lot of the news around some like med tech companies. Like thinking about, I don't remember the name, but there's one that was doing like gut biome stuff that like imploded and the founders like took off to another country and like all this kind of stuff. But to your point, even if it's supposed to be not for medical use or not for medical advice, like people are using these things and paying for them because probably not just because they're interested, right? Like it's because they want to modify something in their behavior. Yeah, there's so much like at the supplement world and all that stuff. I'm sure we could talk about that forever. I'm sure I have a deep interest in a lot of that stuff too, just without any education or experience at all. I just always find it interesting.
Yeah, and then it gets into like, okay, like let's separate out regulation and stuff. Like it starts getting into like reputation management and your board and your governance, right? Like what 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 is the overall risk, right, for the company to be fighting to be seen as like fighting with FDA and
Hmm.
to have like potentially a forced recall, or just like what happens if it comes out, 6 months later, you start getting, a bunch of complaints and on social media and whatnot that this doesn't work well with, people of a certain background or a certain age group and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Then it starts like, oh, okay, now you have, regardless of what the regulators are saying, now you have like this reputation impact. And then, is that really what you want to do? So I find it really interesting, some of the choices companies make as they're going to market about where they're choosing to put their emphasis. I was like talking to one company they have a computer vision AI product, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're launched. We've got our users, and we're like starting to pick up steam and like we're exploring this B2B path." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, very really interesting stuff. That's great. Good job." And um, so tell me a little bit about how about your validation data set. And they're like, what?
We don't need a control.
I like, rewind back. Okay. So training data set, validation data set. They're like, no, no. So yeah, it's funny. There's like, you don't know what you don't know. And so there's just like a lot of education there that needs to be done in this whole AI space because it sounds really great to be able to put a product out there. But yeah, there's just so many people putting products out there, both in the regulated space as well as unregulated,
Hmm.
that just need a little bit more education and support on where to go with it.
Yeah, I agree. Like benchmarking is important, understanding what the variables are and like what a hallucination looks like, right? Like when something gives you an output, does that seem within the realm of possibility? We talk about it a lot internally, not related to Pandium specifically, but just like you hear all the stuff in non-regulated industries about these chatbots and stuff hallucinating. Like if you're using it for data analysis and it gives you a result, is that result sane? Like, does the person that's getting that result have enough context and experience to know if it should be 3 or 300? It's definitely an interesting world we're stepping into when so much of this analysis can be done so quickly and with like very little barrier. It's exciting, but it'll be interesting to watch over the next few years. I want to make sure we save time for something I'm really interested in, which is your time at Clip Health during COVID. I would love to hear how that transition happened with that product and what product management was like in a I would imagine high stress kind of environment, maybe. I don't know. It's just such a cool story. So yeah, like what did Clip do? Like how was that?
Yeah, so Clip Health, we started off as Luminostics, YC-backed company. They were working on an STI test. COVID happened, and they decided to pivot to building a COVID test. I joined, they'd already been around for several years, but I was like basically the first non-scientist employee and helped with taking them through that pivot to COVID. And so it was really interesting in that we had this diagnostic, and like part of the development of a diagnostic, you need to decide what you are optimizing for. And so are you optimizing for being able to take a reading quickly, or are you optimizing for your clinician's workflow? So the chemistry behind the test had been kind of optimized for taking the reading quickly, but not necessarily for the clinician's workflow. And so this was like a really interesting choice then that had to be made about like, do we continue to develop the test for COVID based on the previous science, which had been, around optimizing for this quick testing, or do we work on adjusting it for the clinician workflow? And the time to do that adjustment to the chemistry was going to end up being something like 6 to 9 months in order to make those adjustments. And like, well, we have what we have right now. We're not gonna succeed if we, wait to do what we know the market will want. And so we're going to make the choice of like doing what we can with what we have right now. And so it was absolutely the right choice for that moment. And so we built this point of care test. We went through negotiations with FDA, built a wonderful manufacturing organization, like the supply chain issues. Oh my gosh, our buyers were amazing, being able to it was an amazing effort by everybody. It was like super intense, high stakes, lots of shifting ground, but it ended up being a not as successful as we would have liked, right? Because that chemistry optimization, that difference there. So we were able to do a good amount of business with initial test, but it wasn't the like breakthrough business that we had wanted. And so it was a really great lesson on like speed does not equal success, and really making sure that you're embedding discovery into every phase of the process. So like we knew about the we knew about this kind of, I wouldn't say in month one, we knew about this difference with the clinical workflow versus the timing optimization, probably in like month 2 of our development. And so at that point we had gotten like we were way too far along to make a change. But I think that was like a really good lesson. Just making sure that discovery is always like part of what your product DNA is. And then also just making sure that you're knowing that speed is not necessarily always the right answer. And sometimes, I know it's trite, but sometimes you have to go slow to go fast.
What does clinician workflow mean in this capacity, if you're able to share?
Yeah. So the way that the test was initially built was you would do your swabbing, and then you would put it into the machine and you'd come back in 30 minutes and the machine would give you a result. What the clinicians would like to do is they'd like to have you do the swabbing, put it on a table, and they'll say Arvita 1, Cristina 2, and so on and so forth, and be able to time them separately. And then, at when the 30-minute buzzer goes off, then they take the Arvita cartridge and put it in the machine to be able to have it be read. And so it was that difference because that allowed for much higher throughput. And we ended up going there, but by then I think we were already on to Delta and, the market had gone beyond us.
I mean, that was like such a fast moving, crazy time, right? Like when did you join there? Like when was this all happening?
I joined May 2020.
Oh yeah. So it was like really, really early.
Yeah.
Like I remember in Thanksgiving 2020, like you couldn't get a test here in New York City. Like people were lining up around blocks to get a test. So yeah, you were like right in the thick of it.
Yeah. So I joined May 2020 and then we got our EUA, I want to say, at the end of December or beginning of January. I remember we, oh my gosh, we stayed up until like 3 a.m. putting the final touches on different things to send the shipment out on time. Yeah, very intense times.
Was it like totally different working with the FDA during that time than anything else that you'd ever done? Or was it kind of just more of the same, but maybe more pressure?
I think it was different. I mean, they've always had a really good attitude about things, at least in my experiences, like with they want us to succeed. Like they recognize that there is a public health need for, say, increased access to EKG, better contact lenses so people can see, they understand that there's a public health need out there that the manufacturers are trying to serve. And they just want to understand the tech enough to be able to feel good about saying that this will deliver on the promise, that it will be safe, that it will be effective for what we're claiming. And so they had a great attitude. I think it was really just amplified all the much more and being a collaborative way. During this time period, we were able to go basically in 6 months to having a complete test on the market, as opposed to usually it would be like a 2-year time frame to do it. And part of this was they were doing weekly industry phone calls and live Q&A town hall style questions. And they were really supportive about jumping on the phone when we had questions just for ad hoc meetings. Of course, they were bandwidth constrained and they were doing everything they could to review things they were coming in. But yeah, I thought FDA did a wonderful job of truly collaborating and being supportive to industry.
Wild time. And I mean, for you, it must be cool to be able to think that you were a part of something like that. I feel cool being able to talk to someone that was a part of something like that. Well, I think we are coming up on time here. I'm sure I could talk about this stuff with you forever. I love learning about industries I don't know about, which there are so many, but especially when it's someone who's so deeply experienced like you are. What would your final words of wisdom be for folks that are listening, maybe fledgling PMs or PMs at companies? And I think maybe an interesting take would be that balance of going slow to go fast or just going fast. How would you advise folks maybe to think about that?
When I think about things for people trying to move into PM, I think, being able to focus on having that beginner's mindset and always asking why. To your point, being curious, really focusing on that empathy and discovery. And then also thinking a lot about equity is really important. I know that that's a hot button topic right now, bias and AI and that sort of thing. But taking all the technical out, really thinking about it in terms of what is the business outcome here? What are the reputational impacts? I think that sometimes we get so in the weeds with the technical, we kind of forget the human side of it. And I think that the more you can humanize these things and say, like, if we leave this part of the population out, then like, what does that do for our market share? If we leave this part of the population out, then what does it do from like, would we be okay with somebody saying something about this and it going viral on TikTok and that sort of thing, and what the what the impacts on that might be. So yeah, I guess those are the sorts of things, like how much can you bring it back to impact and the business? Those are the things that like constantly seem like they've been themes throughout my career, whether it's been in quality or in regulatory or in PM, just like what is the business impact? The more you can focus on that framing ends up being helpful.
I love that. And I think a really good PM is something that I say a lot, maybe for my own like sanity, is the idea of like, let's zoom out, like, let's take a step back and like reassess what are we actually talking about here? Because I myself am a person that loves to get deep into the weeds on stuff. And sometimes it's like, what are we even doing right now? Like, to your point, especially with the stuff that you work on, like, would we want this on a billboard? Like, are we comfortable with that? If we're choosing to make hard choices, like, what are those? And do we feel comfortable with defending those choices in the future? This has been so much fun. I feel like we could do this again forever. I have so many more questions for you, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. So thank you to the audience for tuning in. Thank you so much for spending time with us, Arvita. And for the folks listening, if you want more information about Pandium partnerships, integration related stuff, the FDA, all the things, we don't do anything with the FDA. Go to pandium.com. You can check out our blog, other podcast episodes there. And yeah, I'm excited to see, Arvita, where you go next and what you do. And I'll always think of you now when I think about all of these wearables and things of that nature when I see the news about some of this cool new stuff. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Awesome. Thanks again. And we'll see you guys out there.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our content, subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. For more content on tech partnerships, integrations, and APIs, check out our articles, ebooks, and other resources in the description or visit Pandium's website.